create followers or anything like that. I do this every now and again because I like to share things that I've created that are a little bit different. They're not necessarily competitive, although some can be. That is the decks that I've created, but I create them because it's unique. Sorry, they're unique, that no one else has put the set of cards together that I've put together, and I enjoy playing them as a result. I find that's a very rewarding part of the game. So most of you know what's going on with the ban list. Oh man, it's such bullshit. Okay, so just to touch on this very, very briefly. Okay, so they've banned Juggler and Plush Fire. Well, that's fine. Perform Ages was so far ahead of everything else that they need to be reined back in. But that's all that is. That's admitting that these two cards were just too fucking broken in the system, and making Perform Ages less of a dominating deck. But that's not to say that they've nerfed the deck. The deck still plays very aggressively, very competitively, mainly because the pendulum mechanic is so strong. The fact they can recycle their monsters. So yes, it helps other decks that these have been hit, and it hurts those who play Perform Ages. But really, this doesn't impact too heavily on the way the deck plays itself. Other than that, there really isn't much in terms of balancing the meta. Alright, again, they've limited a few of the Perform Pals and the Draco Slayer, which I did mention in one of my Yugioh lock videos, is a powerful card and really hurts decks that play lots of back row. So in that regard, it's good, and limiting Norden. But if you're going to go into Norden anyway, chances are you only need one. You don't need multiple Nordens to go off and wreck shit. So I'm not Draco face off reasoning. I mean, that reasoning just absolutely shits all over. I don't need that card to be competitive. So bye bye those decks. But I get it. You can't legitimately run a deck off the back of one card. That seems ridiculous. That your entire archetype is based around being able to get off reasoning. That just screams that your archetype is unbalanced to begin with. But obviously, as an anti-meta player, I am fucking heartbroken that Chicken Game has been banned. I don't understand why they couldn't have limited it to one, or why they couldn't have banned the cards like, Blasting the Ruins and Life Equalizer, and the one that sets off when you've got all the spells in your graveyard. I can't remember what that's called now. Ban those. Don't ban Chicken Game. At least take it down to one. I appreciate there's a lot of decks that do utilize this in the wrong way. But then, what did you expect, Konami, when you release it alongside Pseudospace? You're basically saying this card is meant to be played with this card. For instance, if I just quickly shimmy over to DN, where we've got a few pictures now finally, Exodia Summon Lord, or Summon Lord Exodia, is meant to be played alongside Obliterate. There is synergy between those two cards. Summon Lord benefits from Exodia pieces in the graveyard, and the fact that Obliterate sends Forbidden One pieces to the graveyard. So you've deliberately put them together, and you did the same with Chicken Game and Pseudospace. Now, of course it was going to be abused. Like, what did you expect? The card itself isn't inherently broken. What is inherently broken with the card is the ability that you can just go off and OTK your opponent first turn. I would nonetheless always argue that so many decks can set up Fields first turn in the meta that you're so far behind the game state anyway that it pretty much is the equivalent of FTKing you. Because for certain decks, if they break out a Barkion or an Aturia Beast, well, fuck me, what are Spellbook's going to do against that? What's any deck that relies on back row going to do against that? And you could argue, well, then perhaps you shouldn't be playing a deck like that. But I think what this comes down to is Konami looking to kill creativity at the expense of forcing you to play one of 10 or 12 options of deck. Just quick before I quickly get into that, Upstart at 1, like, what the fuck? I mean, really, just killing anything that requires a little bit of creativity or support, because, and I'll get into it. This Konami are basically making you play one of 10 to 12 archetypes of deck, whether it's Burning Abyss, Necros. I'll go over here now. Whether it's Burning Abyss, Necros, Cosmo, etc., etc. Basically now, the way that Konami are structuring the game through the ban list is you are forced to play one of these decks. Which is fine if you're happy playing the meta and you're happy being limited to 12 options in decks that play 90% of the time the same way as any other person playing that deck may play it. Yes, you can throw in the odd card here and there, but on the whole, Cosmo plays like Cosmo plays. They've got all their support cards, and well, they haven't got a massive amount of support cards. So this is perhaps one of the exceptions. But the effects of these monsters are so powerful. It's get Farm Girl on or Straw and go from there. So, but the thing with these archetypes is they have inbuilt. If they don't have the support through the magic and the spell and the trap card, they have inbuilt support. So you go somewhere like Burning Abyss, right? And if you, I mean, Jesus, like if you open Tour Guide or as one of these, I don't know the Burning Abyss massively well, I will be honest. All I know is they're a pain in my ass. But you can open one card and you can load up the field with multiple Dantes and a Yugioh off one card, off Tour Guide. Okay, so that's why that card's been hit. And you can see that obviously they've had Graph hit and they've had Sir hit as well to a certain degree. But these cards still have so much inbuilt power that they can just cycle through their deck so quickly and still provide provide monster control on the field. Plus, most of these fucking cards float as well, so they're almost impossible to get rid of. And then you consider they've got Fire Lake as well, which just absolutely destroys any deck that wants to sit on its back row. And then, by the way, because we've sent 2 Burning Abyss monsters to the grave, we'll just recycle those. So we'll send Dante and get Dante. I'm not hating on these decks. Don't get me wrong. These decks are absolutely, fine. All of them. But when you're playing anti-meta, and here's the thing with people who like to play anti-meta, we are not all troll merchants who want to ruin your day. Okay, I will occasionally play something very, very trolly. Okay, but it is occasionally. I take much more pride in playing this Exod Lock or my Exodidolls, or which isn't, I wouldn't call a troll deck because it doesn't FTK you. I'll just quickly show you for those of you who haven't seen it. Sure, why not? Let's save it. It doesn't FTK you. It doesn't. It can't draw through in one turn. What it does is it benefits from shadows, and as you can see, I've already started trying to play around with it, where I've taken out the upstarts and the chicken games that are banned, running the 2 allures because Konami's like, yeah, have Allure of Darkness back, so you can, so we can promote PKs even more. So I've doused some PKs in there, just for some testing to see what the consistency is like adding the PKs in there. But I enjoyed it because it actually worked. I could, for those who don't know, I had 3 upstart and 3 chicken game in there. I think that's about, and then obviously Allure of Darkness came out. And in essence, everything else stayed the same. And I've got a side deck where I can run Soul Charge and open up some Synchro plays if I really needed to. But the idea was to use Shadows as a little bit of a floating mechanism to provide some stall and cycle through the deck. But it wouldn't lock people out. It wouldn't FTK you. It wouldn't destroy all in one go. So I wouldn't necessarily call that a troll deck. But sorry, I'm just trying. There we go. Yeah, Exodia post-ban, real shit. So we're at this point now where, so we have anti-meta decks. Let's get back onto that. So you have anti-meta decks, and But basically, Konami are now saying you can only play 2 anti-meta decks if you want to play anti-meta decks. You can play DDD, or you can play Gravekeepers. And obviously, Gravekeepers have been the same since fucking time began. Not much has changed with Gravekeepers. And DDD actually, certainly versus this particular Exodia lot, just wrecks shit, because my deck is so much based around stall and stun, whilst DDD is stall and stun, but it also has an aggressive countermeasure to it as well. So that's quite a competitive deck. But again, versus meta, it does get blown out of the water. Not always, but a lot of the time. Gravekeepers can be very, very competitive versus the meta, in particular versus things like Necros or Burning Abyss. And basically, if it gets up Necro Valley early, then they're really in a good position, particularly if you're protecting that with Dark Bribe. But that's it. So for instance, as I said, we had Obliterate and Summon Lord Exodia released for Exodia support players. Now, not all Exodia players want to FTK you. We don't all want to Royal Magical Library you first turn chicken game pseudo space, because that gets boring to play against and it gets boring to play. Okay, what Exodia players or any anti-meta players are, we are people who like specific cards, whether they are older cards, whether they've got a niche effect, or whether they're things that don't get played so much, and I'll come back to that in a second. Anti-meta players on the whole, we like to play things that are off the beaten track and off the radar, and might not necessarily be competitive, because A, we play to enjoy it and get more enjoyment from our decks being competitive, or at least attempting to be competitive. But B, because we don't like being told what decks to run. I certainly don't like being told, here, now you've got PK, play that as a deck. Alright, PK is really, at the moment, it's, what was that fucking deck with Scepters in? I can't remember. You're splashing it. You're splashing PKs into the deck. But I don't be told you have to play Burning Abyss, you have to play Necros, you have to play Pepe, you have to play Cosmo. I want to be able to come up with my own deck and create it. But the problem is, because they don't really support these archetypes, and it's not just Exodia, there are other archetypes as well. They don't, Fortune Ladies. God, Fortune Ladies are an archetype long since forgotten, where there is very little support for them. Again, you'd say that you'd splash them into the deck, but without being able to put in all the draw cards that... hang on, let me just... So was it Future Fusions and things like that? I'm sorry. So Fortune's Future. But so without the spell cards that go alongside it, the deck doesn't really. You can't run a Fortune Lady deck as a standalone deck. You've got to splash it. The problem with splashing it is you need probably more cards than you would like in the deck to get that draw power to work for it. That you're going to open with a lot of brick hands a lot of the time, a lot of dead hands that aren't going to work for you, and so the deck becomes, or at least the mini archetype becomes unviable. But because these decks don't have inherent draw properties, what it's got is an inherent stun factor, and it's a beatdown monster that's relatively straightforward to get out. But in terms of being able to protect it, yes, it's immune to all effects, but it can be destroyed by battle. And because you're bringing cards back to the hand every turn, you've got to run it with other bits and pieces that sort of hurt the battle phase, hurt your opponent's ability to go into battle phase and get off the battle phase. But there's no inherent draw here. There's no inherent, the Forbidden One arm does not have an effect where if I send it to the graveyard, I can special summon a Forbidden left leg from my deck, graveyard or hand. That there isn't that level of effect to it. You look at any a Burning Abyss or Cosmo card or Necros card, they've got enough effect text that would fill up the first chapter of a Harry Potter book. So we have to rely as anti-meta players on the support network. So Chicken Game was Konami throwing us a bone. It was really appreciated. It was like, okay, we're taking away skill drain, we're limiting skill drain, we're limiting vanities, and I could understand the argument for doing that. I understand. Certainly for vanities, because vanities just shut down an entire mechanic. But But skill drain you could get around. You know, you could Black Rose the field, and alright, if I then played Imperial Custom, you could still get certain effects off. For instance, you could Diamond Dire Wolf it, and there are other ways around skill drain. But we rely on these cards to be able to put something together that is competitive. And by nerfing these cards and not giving us anything else in its place, it really, really, really does hurt how anti-meta players play. And it's clear Konami have no interest in creativity, because there's over 8,000 cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Okay, there's over 8,000 cards, and if you're being generous, 800, maybe 1,000 of them see gameplay. So you've got, you know, about 10-12% of all the cards that you've created being used at the moment. Alright, that's because some cards will become defunct and not see the same amount of game time, and they'll be outclassed by things. But isn't that the inherent problem? That the power creep's becoming so much, becoming so dominant in the game, that Konami are being forced to throw more and more and more support to the meta decks by giving them crazier boss monsters, crazier effect monsters, crazier trap cards, pendulum mechanics. It create a pendulum mechanic that just is so overpowered at times, that this is the problem. So all these 7,000 odd cards you've got, you know, these 7,000 odd cards you've got just sort of sitting there unused, don't see any game time. And the real problem with that is, sorry, I just had a missed call and that's thrown me off. And the real problem is that no one uses them, and the game becomes stale, because then everyone does start playing the same 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 decks, and no one bothers to create anything that's a little bit different and a little bit off-piste, because A, it can't possibly be competitive. Maybe you can win the odd game here or there against a guy that bricks hard turn 1, or against a really duff deck, but you can't create anything because it's going to be severely outclassed. And I think that's a real problem, because you're killing interest in the game. What was so great about it before is that you could create crazy decks revolving around Exodia, or you could create, alright, not all of them were necessarily good for the game, but there were stall decks that you could play. There were different sorts of aggressive options that you could play, but you've just limited it. So none of these cards will ever see any game time, and I think that's really a shame for the game, because you've just killed the ability for people to want to invest time in going, you know what, maybe I could get this one, based on these 2 random cards, how can you get a deck to function that actually competes versus the meta? And this in front of you is a reasonable attempt at that. It's not massively overpowered. It's not degenerate. Alright, you might not like the way it plays, but that's because you're being beaten by an Exodia deck that doesn't play like a traditional Exodia deck. And that, for a lot of people, that pisses you off, because we're relying on all these trap cards, and the meta to a certain degree doesn't really rely on trap and magic cards all that much. So taking away the likes of Chicken Game, limiting Upstart, which is just ridiculous, but they're not giving anything back in return, is dangerous, and you're running the risk, Konami, of upsetting's the wrong word, but just leaving a lot of people disenfranchised with the game, because the game is now about how many duels really last more than 4 turns. 4 or 5 turns. You can get some that last even fewer than that, and that's a sad state of affairs, where your card game won't even go 10, 15, 20 turns. The potential of that potential excitement, where you've maybe got 5 cards left in the deck and you need to draw into one of them. That real sort of anime TV show bullshit. But But that just doesn't happen anymore because decks just go spam, 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 attack for game, done. And what are you going to do about it? And I think that's a real shame for the game. People criticise Yugioh decks or stall decks or whatever it might be as being solitaire. But when you're playing today's meta, you're not really thinking about what you're doing either. You're going through a set formula, a set pattern that's been preordained for you with cards that have got these inbuilt effects that are meant to go off in that particular way. And there is no creativity. So there's no thought process for you as a player because you're just doing what you've seen someone else do and knowing it's going to work. So I don't see how that is any different to solitaire. You know, I'm not salty versus the meta. The meta is what keeps the majority of people in the game. But the anti-meta is what really brings people on the fringes back into the game. You know, the people that used to play it, who don't necessarily play it competitively, they play it for a little bit of fun, but they want to be able to siphon through these 8,000 cards that we're supposed to be able to create decks from. And, you know, come up with something that might be a little bit off-piste and a little bit quirky. But every now and again, we'll throw up that victory. And that victory then means more than, all right, maybe not in a championship, in a YCS, but it means more on DN or Dev Pro than someone else just playing with, you know, a set package, an archetype that's preordained how it's going to play. So that's my concern with Yu-Gi-Oh! Anyway. I feel Konami really aren't understanding their full market, and they're killing off the anti-meta players. If you want to kill off the troll decks, that's fine. I don't mind that, but then hit the troll cards. You know, Chicken Game is slightly degenerate, but it is not a troll card. You can get rid of it. That in itself does not lead to you losing turn 1. The same with Upstart. And to give nothing back, to not support any of the lesser known archetypes, and yet just keep funneling shit into the meta. It's just beyond me. It really is just beyond me. So anyway, I'm going to be testing out my Yugioh PK attempt. I'm just going to play around with this for now, and I might come back to my lock deck and see what I can do to get that to work, because the problem with the lock deck now is without the draw power, I'm a little bit fucked. So I could run multiple card Ds, but then I can't necessarily set up turn 1 either with Yugioh Summon Lord, so I might have to run multiple card Ds, multiple trap monsters, and think about it slightly differently. But I just think it's a real shame that Konami want to stop you from thinking for yourself. They want to stop you from being, you know, not being a sheep, for actually wanting to engage with the game in a completely different way, and they are trying to make you buy into how they see the game playing, which is through 10 and 12 archetypes, which means they know they're going to generate massive amount of money on these starter packs or structured deck packs or these new card releases that people are going to be buying in the hope they get a new PK or a Cosmo Destroyer or whatever it is that they find in it, rather than what it used to be was, how can I, in the very early days, you know, back in mid-90s, was it? Mid-90s? Or was it a bit later than that? Maybe early 2000s, which was try and make this work. And alright, maybe they were a little bit stupid, the decks, because you didn't have necessarily the depth in archetype and depth in support. But in some ways that was a bit more fun, and I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is losing a little bit of the fun by becoming so super serious. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I could be wrong. I leave it to you. As always, see you again soon. So bye for now.